Okay, so we've got our lower coolant pipe out. Pay attention, because I see a lot of cars come in that don't have the clamp facing or in the right direction. So we basically have this clamp around the 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock position. So that's why when you go to reassemble all this and you take it apart, take the lower pipe out, then you can get to this clamp to move it back. And then when you go to reinstall everything, you're going to reinstall the upper pipe first. Because if you put the lower coolant pipe in and then you get the upper pipe in, you're gonna have a hard time putting it like the factory clocked the clamp on the bypass tube. So now with that pipe out of the way, we can go ahead and move it back. So with that move back, this one's held in with 3 of the same bolts. There's no nuts on it, and they're the 6mm Allens. Again, make sure that you are as far in as possible. This pipe looks great, no corrosion where the bypass hoses go. We are going to replace this coolant temperature sensor. It's red. The newer style sensors are blue. It's probably okay, but again, this is preventative maintenance. Okay, pipes are out. The thermostat is in there. So we're gonna go ahead and use our 90-degree pliers, give it a good little yank. We'll go ahead and let it drain. We're gonna go ahead now and we're gonna remove the bank 2 timing cover. This one comes out first. We'll remove that. These are in place with 5mm and 8mm hardware. You have 3 of these 8mm head bolts. All right, that's the last one of those. And we'll go to our 5mm Allens. The actual grommets and bushings are in really good condition. If we need to replace onesie, twosies, we'll go ahead and do that. If we get a car that comes in and they're just all annihilated, these bushings are not cheap. There's aftermarket ones you can get. We like to actually replace the entire hardware with the Z-spec stuff because we just get to replace it all, and it's cheaper than having to replace a bunch of the bushings using the factory Nissan part. Car like this, of course, we want to keep it all original. So if we happen to give a few of them, we'll just replace them with new ones from Nissan. All right, this guy should come off now. Let's pop them off like that. There it is. Still have the original seal that Nissan used. A lot of times they never stay in place, as you can kind of see over with the heat, it shrinks. And take a look at that, the original timing belt. Look at that. So we've got our coolant pipes out, we've got our timing covers are off. Now is the next important step. You got to get the engine on TDC. So it's on their own, and they take everything off and they don't pay attention to having the engine on TDC, which is going to make your life a living hell. So really easy. We're going to use our 1/2-inch ratchet, 27mm socket, and we're going to line up the mark on the crank pulley to the 0 mark on the lower timing cover. So while you're doing this, of course, you also have to make sure that your cams aren't off 180. So we can see that our marks are lining up to the little marks on the back of the rear timing covers. So these marks in the back are just for reference. They're not like your 100%. They're just to give you an idea that you're pretty close. So we've got it all lined up. Our mark on the pulley, 0 on our lower timing cover, and then you can see our marks are in the correct position. And again, remember, these are just for reference. When you go to put the belt on, you want to make sure that your marks on the belt, all 5 marks, are dead nuts with the indicator on the gears. You can leave the sensor itself on the bracket, and there are dowels in the head to get this bracket lined up. So that way there's a keyway in here and also in the cam, so that you only get this in one direction, right, in one position. So now that that's off, we can go ahead and remove our crank bolt, holds the factory damper in place, and more than likely we'll have to use our tool to press it off of there. So using their same 27mm impact socket, I've got my Matco 1/2-inch gun, low profile, so it makes it easy to get in there between the AC and allow us to loosen up that bolt. Get my hearing equipment on, and we'll go ahead and blast that thing off just like that. Get the rest of it off by hand. And there's our bolt, looks good. Now, there are rare instances you might be able to get this off carefully, but oftentimes than not, it's always best to use the appropriate tool, which is a puller of some sort. So that's what we're gonna do here. We'll demonstrate that. I have a Matco service set that we use for a puller, and will basically allows us to press this off, pull it off without damaging the damper, our lower timing cover, and it takes a little bit more time to do it, but honestly, it's part of the job. You wanna do it right. So let's go ahead and get started with that. All right, guys, so this is our Matco, they call it a master bolt grip set. I don't know why they use that name, but it's a puller, it's a set. So you have the meat and potatoes here, and you have different lengths. So if you've got something that's really deep, you've got longer versions of of it. So we're gonna go ahead and use the shorter version. And they also have a centering tool that goes on this, right? So as it goes into the front of the snout, you're not gonna damage the front of the crank snout. So that's, you also want to be mindful and have this also centered as best as possible onto the crank. So we can kind of prep, get this ready, go like this, and then this is going to bolt to the damper itself. So the factory Nissan damper has two 6mm by 1/0 threaded holes that we're going to bolt this bad boy on. Some of these kits, as you can see, have different bolts for different applications. Unfortunately, this kit doesn't have the 6mm setup, so we just have random bolts that we've collected here in the little cubby area that we're going to use, because obviously the 6mm stuff is pretty small. So the diameter of this is large to accommodate other vehicle manufacturers' larger hardware that they use. All right, so our puller is on. I haven't tightened the 6mm hardware, and that's so I can just get this centered on there so that we're centered on the actual snout of the crank. And we can go ahead and we'll tighten up our 6mm hardware just using random hardware here. And this is where you want to be holding with one hand the damper, because it will come out and be heavy. You can already see it's pressing out. This makes it so easy to use this tool. And just like that, you have your crank damper removed. So you can see how the tool works for those of you that aren't mechanics. So there's threaded holes on the front of the damper that this bolts to, and then we have our threaded rod, and there's our centering little dowel piece that we have. Just presses it right off. All right, so with our crank damper removed, we're gonna go ahead and undo the bolt that holds the alternator bracket in, and this is gonna allow us to get room to one of the bolts that holds the lower timing cover on. It's optional at this point. You can remove the plate that goes on the front of the gear, and notice that it's concave. Concave portion that goes out will go out towards the front of the car. So all this is going to get replaced anyway, just to show you guys. We'll go ahead and remove most of our timing cover hardware, and then we can pop that guy off and we'll bring the car down. Snake that. And then you can clearly see our marks here. All right, so we've got the lower cover off. We're gonna go ahead and remove the intake VTC covers. So there's a spring behind here, so you wanna be mindful when you're removing the last bit of your bolts that it's under tension and you don't wanna damage the threads on the actual pulley. And because the VTCs work off of oil and oil pressure, you're gonna have oil that's gonna come out of there. This is the O-ring and the VTC spring that will get replaced. Okay, so now before we release the tension on the belt, this is our tensioner here, this is our top idler, and this is our bottom left. Before we release the tension on the belt, this is our tensioner here, this is our top idler, and this is our bottom left idler. So before we release any tension, we're going to loosen our bolts that hold our cam gears in place. So these are 11 mils, these are 19 mils. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. Once we do that, we can go ahead and release the tension on the tensioner, but we'll also add a bolt to keep the tensioner piston from pushing open all the way. And there is a little threaded hole. So when you buy the tensioner brand new, you'll see that there's a threaded bolt in there. That has to be removed when you install it. So we're gonna install it now, since we're removing it, to keep the tensioner from opening up and coming out of its bore. And we're just loosening it. We're not removing all the hardware. All right, we're gonna remove the water pump. That way it gives us a little bit more access to get this bolt onto the tensioner, so we can get a clear shot of it for you guys. 6 bolts hold the water pump in place. Past the belt. Back in the day, guys would just do the timing belts on these engines, and they wouldn't replace the water pump or the thermostat or even the cam seals. They just figured, oh, it's a timing belt, we're just going to replace the timing belt. There's a lot more to the service than just the belt itself. All right, now that we have all our bolts out, we just need to gently tap the water pump to get it to come loose. We have our pan underneath to collect the rest of the coolant. So all in all, everything's in really good shape for being original. You know, the low miles helps, but somebody definitely was changing the coolant regularly on this thing to keep it from corroding. All right, so now that we have the water pump out, we have a lot more room to get this bolt.
Oh, want the bolt again?
Yep, we have a lot more room. So we'll come on the other side over here, but we're gonna thread it in. So here is our bolt, and we're just gonna thread this in by hand, assuming we can. Sometimes the threads are a little nasty, you can't, but we're just gonna go until it bottoms out. And that's gonna prevent, again, this piston from expanding, pushing out. It's gonna keep this tensioner locked in this position, which we wanna do. That's in place, we can go ahead and remove our hardware. There are 2 bolts and 1 nut that keep that tensioner tight against the block. 2 bolts are out, the nut is the last piece, and you can see how immediately it just flops and all your tension has been released. Now you can remove the belt really easily, just like this.